I never imagined I'd be here, spilling my heart to a bunch of strangers on Reddit. But honestly, it's probably the only place where I can vent without feeling like I'm being judged. So, here it goes. Let me tell you how everything fell apart. I'm Jack Mitchell, the younger son in a pretty well-off family. My parents run a big manufacturing business. You know the kind. Enough money that people assume you're set for life. But here's the thing. I never cared about it. I wanted to carve my own path, build something on my own, not just sit around waiting for my parents to hand me the keys to their company. Unlike my older brother, Aaron, he was always the golden child. Everyone thought he was the chosen one, the future heir to the empire. And me? I was the guy in the background, just working hard, keeping my head low, and trying to stay out of the family drama. Then there was Rachel, my wife. I thought I hit the jackpot with her. She was smart, beautiful, and charming. Everything I could have asked for. Sure, we had our fights now and then, but what couple doesn't? At first, she made me feel like the luckiest man alive. But looking back, I can see it for what it really was, manipulation. I was blind. She dropped these little comments every so often. You know, it's not fair that Aaron gets everything, Jack. You deserve more. Or, why don't you stand up for yourself? You're just as important to the family business. She'd say these things like she actually cared about me, but now I see the truth. She wasn't concerned about me. She was angling for the money, the power, and the family status. At first, I brushed it off. I thought she just wanted what was best for me. Maybe she was a little pushy, but I figured she had my back. I was so naive, right? I had no interest in the family business, and I made that clear from day one. But Rachel wouldn't let it go. She'd always bring it up in casual conversations, hinting that I should ask my parents for more. I'd shrug it off, thinking she was just ambitious. Meanwhile, Aaron was living it up. Fancy cars, expensive vacations, barely doing any work at the company. He was the kind of guy who could charm the world, but deep down, he was lazy. My parents always talked about how Aaron was the future of the company. They believed he was the rightful heir. I didn't care. Honestly, I was relieved. I wanted to build my own thing. I didn't need their money or approval. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I'm not going to lie. There were red flags with Rachel, but I ignored them. She seemed a little too interested in the family fortune, always talking about how I was selling myself short by not going after a bigger slice of the pie. I told her I didn't need any of that. I was fine with what I had. She'd smile and nod, but I knew deep down she didn't agree. She wanted more. A lot more. But I brushed it off. After all, it's your wife, right? You don't think they're going to stab you in the back while whispering sweet words in your ear. But man, was I wrong. Things started changing after Aaron came back from one of his so-called business trips, which were really just extended vacations. Rachel started acting strange, distant, making excuses to stay out late or cancel plans. At first, I didn't think much of it. We'd been married for a few years by then, and I figured it was just a rough patch. We all go through those, right? But then I started noticing how she'd talk about Aaron. It was subtle, but something was off. There was admiration in her voice, maybe even something stronger. She'd say things like, "Aaron really knows how to live, doesn't he?" Or, "You could learn a thing or two from your brother." I didn't think much of it at the time. Honestly, I figured she was just frustrated with me. I'd been working long hours trying to get my own projects off the ground, and we hadn't been spending as much time together. I thought maybe she was bored, or maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention. So, I tried to fix things. Planned more date nights, spent more time with her, but nothing worked. She was always distracted, always glued to her phone, or making up some excuse to be somewhere else. Then one day, I came home early from work. I don't even know why. I just had this feeling something wasn't right as soon as I walked in. The house was quiet, too quiet. My heart was racing, but I didn't know why. I went upstairs to our bedroom, and that's when everything fell apart. There they were, Rachel and Aaron, right in the middle of our bed. My wife, my own brother, together. I couldn't believe it. I froze for a second, unable to process what I was seeing. Then the anger hit like a truck. I stormed in and punched Aaron, sending him flying off the bed and into the wall. Rachel screamed, covering herself, but I didn't even look at her. I grabbed Aaron by the throat and threw him out of the house, half naked, with only the clothes he managed to scoop up off the floor. I thought Rachel would be apologetic or at least show some kind of remorse, but she just sat there, completely unfazed, as if nothing was wrong. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Aaron is way better than you, Lucas. You should have seen this coming." That's when it hit me. She never loved me. She was using me the whole time, trying to get into the family fortune. And the whole time, I was the idiot who thought I married someone who actually cared about me. She wasn't just sleeping with my brother. She was cutting me out of my own life. She didn't try to explain herself or apologize. She just packed her things and left. I'll never forget that moment. The sound of the door slamming shut behind her, sealing the fate of my marriage. When Rachel walked out, it felt like the whole world came to a halt. The silence in the house was deafening. But inside my head, pure chaos. I couldn't process what had just happened. I mean, having your wife cheat on you is one thing, but with your own brother, in your own bed, that was something else entirely. I felt like a complete fool, standing there, staring at that door, trying to make sense of what I just witnessed. But honestly, there was no making sense of it. It was pure betrayal, ugly and raw. That night, I couldn't sleep. I didn't even try. My brain wouldn't stop replaying that moment, over and over, like a bad movie stuck on repeat. Rachel and Aaron together. My wife. My brother. Two people I trusted more than anyone, now stabbing me right in the heart. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. My chest tightened. My hands balled into fists. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy something, anything, to let that rage out. But I didn't. Instead, I spent the next few days in a daze, completely numb. I didn't go to work. I didn't talk to anyone. I just stayed at home, replaying every single moment of my life with Rachel, trying to figure out where I went wrong. How did I not see this coming? The signs were there, all along. I just ignored them like an idiot. Rachel had been distant for months, maybe even longer. And Aaron? He'd always been a little too familiar with her. But I never connected the dots. Looking back, there were so many moments when I should have known something wasn't right. Like how Rachel would defend Aaron, even when he was being lazy and irresponsible. Or how she'd cancel plans with me to go hang out with friends and come back late, smelling like someone else's cologne. I should have paid attention. I should have asked more questions. But I didn't. And now, I was paying the price for being so blind. About a week later, I finally pulled myself out of that fog. I knew I couldn't just sit around anymore. I needed answers. I had to confront Rachel. I had to figure out what had really been going on behind my back. So I called her. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe an apology. Maybe some kind of explanation. But when she answered the phone, it was like nothing had happened at all. Her voice was calm, almost emotionless. "What do you want, Jack?" she asked, as though I was the one who should be apologizing. I felt the anger rise up again, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "I want to know why," I said, my teeth clenched. "Why did you do it? Why my brother?" There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally admit she'd messed up. But no, of course not. "Why?" she said after a beat, her voice so cold. "Because you're weak, Jack. You've always been weak. You let your brother walk all over you, and you were too blind to see it. Aaron is a real man," she continued. "He knows what he wants, and he takes it. You've spent your whole life trying to avoid his shadow, but the truth is, you'll never be as good as him. Not in business, not in life, and definitely not in bed." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to grab her by the throat and demand an explanation. But all I could do was listen to her twist the knife deeper. I could barely hold myself together. "I can't believe you," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "You never loved me. Did you? This was all about the money. You used me to get closer to the family fortune. She didn't hesitate for a second. Of course it was, Jack. Did you really think I married you for love? You're pathetic. She didn't even flinch. You've always played second fiddle to Aaron. I needed a man who could give me the life I deserve. And that was never going to be you. That was it. That was the final straw. I hung up before I lost it completely. My head was spinning. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. She admitted it, just like that. She never loved me. She was using me to get closer to the family's wealth. And Aaron? My own brother was in on it the whole time. The betrayal hit me like a wave. I wanted to punch something. I wanted to scream, to smash every piece of furniture in the house. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed a bottle of whiskey, took a long swig, and collapsed on the couch. My thoughts were a jumbled mess. How had I been so blind? How had I let this happen? I'd always prided myself on being the sensible one, the one who didn't get sucked into family drama or power games. But here I was, right in the middle of it, and it was tearing me apart. Over the next few days, my anger started to shift. It became something colder, more calculated. I started thinking about what I could do next. Revenge. I wasn't going to just sit back and let Rachel and Aaron get away with this. I wasn't going to be the fool who let his wife and brother walk all over him. No, I was going to make them pay. I didn't know how, but I was going to figure it out. But first, I needed to face my family. I couldn't keep this secret forever. Sooner or later, my parents were going to find out. And when they did, everything would explode. One night, after drinking enough whiskey to numb the pain, I called them. I told them everything. Everything about the affair, the betrayal, all of it. My mom, Linda, was heartbroken. She couldn't believe Aaron would do something like this. My dad, Frank, was silent for a long time, but I could feel the anger building up inside him. He'd always been Aaron's biggest supporter, the one who believed Aaron would take over the business one day. But now, that dream was shattered. "We need to talk," my dad said, his voice low. "This changes everything." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I could feel the shift in the air. The family dynamic was about to implode, and Aaron was about to lose everything he'd always taken for granted. After that call, everything started moving way faster than I could keep up with. The tension in the room was suffocating. The next morning, my parents showed up at my door without any warning. They didn't even call first. They just knocked, looking like they'd seen a ghost. I knew the conversation ahead was going to be painful, but I had no idea how deep the cuts would go. I let them in, and we sat down in the living room, the same room where Rachel and I had shared so many good memories. Now, it felt like a place of sickness. The house where she had betrayed me, where she brought my brother into our bed. My mom, Linda, looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her eyes were red, clearly from crying, and she was nervously playing with her wedding ring, a habit she always had when she was anxious. My dad, Frank, was silent. He had that stone-cold expression on his face. He wasn't one to show emotion, but I could feel the anger radiating off of him. And it wasn't just anger at Aaron. I could feel the disappointment directed at me, as if somehow this whole mess was my fault. "We need to talk about Aaron," my dad said, his voice low and serious. I braced myself for the worst. I expected them to defend him, to tell me to move on for the sake of the family. But what came next completely blindsided me. "We had no idea about any of this, Lucas," my mom said softly, her voice trembling. "I can't believe Aaron would do this to you, to the family." I stared at her, my mind racing. For the first time, I saw real disappointment in her eyes, not aimed at me, but at Aaron. She had always put him on a pedestal, always defended him. But now, that pedestal had collapsed, and she was finally seeing him for what he really was. "We've been thinking," my dad spoke up, his tone steady but sharp. "This whole situation with Aaron? It's unacceptable. He's shown us he's not responsible enough to take over the business. Hell, he's not responsible enough for anything." His words hit me hard, but I still couldn't fully understand where this was going. What are you saying? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We're cutting Aaron out, my dad said bluntly. Effective immediately. I sat there, completely stunned. Cutting Aaron out? That was huge. My parents had always planned on him taking over the family business. And now, just like that, they were throwing him out. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or devastated. This wasn't just about business. This was about our entire family. Aaron had always been the favorite, the golden boy. And now, he was losing everything. He's a liability, Lucas, my dad continued. We can't trust him anymore. He's shown his true colors, and we need someone who can carry the business forward. I could sense where this was going, but part of me still resisted. I'd never wanted to be involved in the family business. I'd spent my life carving my own path, doing my own thing, away from their expectations. But now, everything was changing. I felt the weight of it settling on my shoulders. We want you to take over, my mom said, her voice shaking but firm. You've always been the responsible one. You've worked hard, never asked for anything. It's time for you to get what you deserve. I looked at them, my mind spinning. This was insane. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be dragged into the mess Aaron had created. But then again, a part of me couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing him finally pay for his arrogance. After years of living off the family's wealth, treating the business like a personal ATM, Aaron was being cut off. And Rachel? Oh, I could already picture the look on her face when she found out all her scheming had been for nothing. But it wasn't that simple. I couldn't just jump in without thinking. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I admitted. This is huge. My dad nodded, his face softening for the first time since they arrived. We know it's a lot to ask, Lucas, but we believe in you. You've always been the one who could handle responsibility. Aaron, well, he's proven he can't. I leaned back, running my hands through my hair. This was too much, too fast. I'd spent my whole life staying out of the family business, and now they wanted me to step in, to take over, to fill Aaron's shoes. But then I thought about him, how he'd always been handed everything, never worked for a thing. And I thought about Rachel, how she'd used me to get closer to the family fortune. For too long, I'd been passive, letting people walk all over me. It was time to take control. It was time to stop being the guy who sits on the sidelines. I'll do it. The words came out before I could even process them. I'll take over. My parents looked relieved, like a huge burden had been lifted. My mom even smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. We're proud of you, Lucas, she said quietly. We know this isn't what you wanted, but it's the right thing to do. After they left, I sat there in silence, trying to take it all in. I'd just agreed to take over the family business. Aaron was out, and I was in. The entire family dynamic had shifted, and now I was at the center of it. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt something else, something new. Empowerment. I wasn't living in Aaron's shadow anymore. I was in control now. But with control came responsibility. I knew I couldn't let my guard down, not with Rachel still out there. She had always been after the family fortune, and now that Aaron was out of the picture, I was the one with the power. I knew it was only a matter of time before she came crawling back, trying to worm her way into my life again. I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't going to let Rachel use me again. The next few weeks were a blur, full of meetings with lawyers, accountants, and all the higher-ups to get everything in line. It was a steep learning curve, but I threw myself into it, determined to prove I could handle the responsibility. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something to fight for, something that was mine. Meanwhile, Aaron's life was falling apart. Word spread fast about what had happened, and soon he was the black sheep of the family. He had burned all his bridges, and now he was left with nothing. Rachel, of course, moved in with him right after she left me, thinking she was securing her place in the Mitchell fortune. But as soon as she realized Aaron was out of the picture, that there was no more money coming his way, she changed her tune. I heard through the grapevine that they were fighting nonstop. Rachel was furious. She had put all her eggs in Aaron's basket, only to watch him lose everything. Now, She was stuck with a man who had nothing left to offer her. As for Aaron, he was finally facing the consequences of a lifetime of poor decisions. For once, I didn't feel sorry for him. Taking over the family business had never been part of my plan. Hell, I'd spent most of my life trying to stay as far away from it as possible, letting Aaron take the reins while I did my own thing. But now, everything had shifted. I was no longer the younger brother sitting on the sidelines. I was in charge now, and the entire family business was resting on my shoulders. It was overwhelming, sure, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. I wasn't just Jack, the second son. Now, I was the one calling the shots. The first few months were a blur of negotiations, learning the ropes, and figuring out the ins and outs of the company. I had no choice but to dive headfirst into it. Long hours, late nights. I knew I couldn't afford to fail. Not with everyone watching me. The board members, investors, employees. But honestly, part of me actually relished the challenge. I wasn't doing this to prove myself to my parents or to anyone else who had doubted me. I was doing it for me. I had to show myself that I was capable, that I could succeed on my terms. It wasn't easy. There were nights I came home drained, my mind racing with everything I had to do. And sometimes, in the quiet of my empty house, my thoughts would drift back to Rachel. I hated that she still had a hold on me. That, even after everything she had done, she still occupied space in my head. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the business, the sting of her betrayal was always there, lingering in the background. But, as the weeks turned into months, I started to get the hang of things. The company began to thrive under my leadership. I brought in new partners, revamped outdated practices, and launched initiatives that opened up new markets for us. One of those new partners was Sophie Clark, a sharp, no-nonsense businesswoman with an eye for innovation. From the moment we started working together, I knew she was the real deal. She was driven, ambitious, and focused on the work. She didn't care about my last name or the family fortune. She was all about making things happen. No pretenses, just results. It felt like a breath of fresh air after the suffocating mess of my marriage. As for Aaron and Rachel, their situation was unraveling fast. I started hearing things through the family grapevine. Aaron, stripped of his inheritance and left with nothing but his own incompetence, was struggling to find a job. For his whole life, he had banked on the idea that the family business would carry him. Now, with that safety net gone, he was floundering. Rachel? She'd made her bed, and now she was lying in it. The first time I ran into Rachel after everything happened was at a charity event. I didn't even know she'd be there. But when I spotted her, all those old feelings, the anger, the betrayal, came rushing back. She was with Aaron, of course, but they didn't look like the smug, confident couple they once were. Aaron looked beaten down, like the weight of his failures was finally catching up to him. And Rachel? Well, the superiority she used to flaunt was gone. She had the nerve to smile at me, like she expected us to have some friendly chat. I wasn't having any of it. I walked right past her, not giving her the satisfaction of a response. She probably hated that. For years, she'd manipulated me, controlled me, twisted me around her finger. And now? Now, I was out of her reach. That was the real victory. Things only got worse for them. I heard they were fighting constantly. Aaron couldn't hold down a job, and Rachel, who had thought she was trading up when she left me for him, was now stuck with a man who couldn't give her the life she thought she deserved. It didn't take long for her to realize that the golden future she had imagined with Aaron wasn't coming. I'm sure she regretted every decision she made, but honestly, I didn't care. She had made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. Meanwhile, I kept building. The business was thriving, and with each success, my confidence grew. But it wasn't just about the money. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of everything. My life, the business, my future. And no one, especially not Rachel, was going to take that away from me again. Sophie and I continued to collaborate, and as we spent more time together, our professional relationship evolved into something more. There was a connection, something real between us. It wasn't like my past with Rachel, where everything felt manipulated and calculated. With Sophie, it felt authentic. She wasn't after my status or money. She respected me for who I was, and I admired her for her work ethic and drive. We started hanging out more outside the office, grabbing drinks, having dinner. Over time, those dinners became something more than just business. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking for a relationship, not after all the mess with Rachel. But sometimes life hands you things you never expect. And truth be told, after all I had been through, it felt good to have someone real around. It felt good to be with someone who wasn't trying to take something from me. Someone who saw me for who I really was. But even as things with Sophie began to deepen, my past with Rachel loomed in the background. I knew she wasn't done with me. I could feel her waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, after a grueling day at work, my phone rang. It was Rachel. I almost let it go to voicemail, but for some reason, curiosity pulled me in. "Lucas," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "We need to talk." The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was off. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave her to deal with whatever mess she had made with Aaron. But I picked up anyway. Her voice was almost gentle, and it immediately set me on edge. This was the woman who had destroyed everything, shattered my trust, torn my family apart, and stabbed me in the back. But now she sounded different, almost like someone who had been broken by her own choices. "Lucas," she said again, after a long pause, "can we talk?" I didn't know whether to laugh or hang up. What was left to talk about? "Rachel?" I said, flatly. There was a brief silence before she spoke. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "I shouldn't have left you for Aaron. I see it now. I was wrong." I leaned back in my chair, an overwhelming mix of disbelief and rage stirring in me. This was the moment I knew would come. The moment Rachel thought she could waltz back into my life after everything she'd done. I imagined her sitting in some dingy apartment, probably with Aaron, plotting how to worm her way back into my good graces. "You made a mistake?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You think you can just show up now, after everything? After sleeping with my brother? After manipulating me, using me, betraying me? Now, because your life with Aaron is falling apart, you think I'm supposed to just forgive and forget?" "I know I messed up," she said quickly, as if trying to hold on to any ounce of hope. "But I've had time to think. I love you, Lucas. I never should have left Aaron. He's not who I thought he was." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. The sheer nerve of it was almost laughable. "Let me get this straight. You love me now? After everything? After the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation? You suddenly love me because your perfect plan with Aaron fell apart?" "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I know I hurt you. But we can fix this. We can start over. Please, just give me a chance." For a second, I felt the flicker of the old me, the part of me that might have believed her, that naive guy who was desperate for closure. But that Lucas was gone. The man who had been broken by her lies, the one who had spent countless sleepless nights tormented by her betrayal, wasn't who I was anymore. Now, I was stronger, smarter, wiser, and I wasn't about to let her back into my life. "You're not sorry, Rachel," I said, my voice steady. "You're just desperate. You're only here because Aaron couldn't give you what you thought you deserved. And now you're crawling back because you've got nothing left." "But I love you," she started, but I cut her off. "No," I snapped. "You don't. You never did. You loved what I could give you. You loved the idea of what you could get from me. Power, wealth. But now that your fantasy with Aaron has fallen apart, you're here, hoping to use me again. But it's not going to happen." I heard her crying on the other end of the line, but I didn't care. There was no sympathy left in me for her. This was the same woman who had laughed in my face after I found out about her and Aaron. The one who had taken everything from me and now thought she could come back, playing the victim. I wasn't falling for it. "We're done, Rachel," I said coldly. You made your choice. Now live with it. Before she could say anything else, I hung up, and just like that, the weight she had held over me for so long was gone. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Rachel was no longer a part of my life. She was just a mistake, one that I had finally closed the door on. As time passed, I immersed myself further in the business. Sophie and I continued to grow closer, both professionally and personally. She was everything Rachel wasn't: genuine, hardworking, and straightforward. With Sophie, there were no games, no hidden agendas, just honesty and mutual respect. We spent more time together outside of work, and before I knew it, those late nights at the office turned into dinners, which naturally evolved into something deeper. There was no rush, no pressure. It just felt right. I didn't have to second-guess her intentions or wonder if she was after my family's fortune. Sophie didn't care about that. She saw me for who I was, not what I could provide. As for Aaron, well, I had expected his downfall. It didn't take long for the cracks in his relationship with Rachel to become full-blown fractures. I heard from a few mutual acquaintances that they were fighting constantly. Aaron couldn't hold down a job, and Rachel had lost all respect for him. When she finally realized he was never going to be the man she had hoped for, she left. I wasn't surprised. They were both users, and when there was nothing left for them to gain from each other, their relationship fell apart. Aaron, once the golden boy of the family, had nothing left. He had burned every bridge and lost every opportunity. Now, he was just another cautionary tale. As for Rachel, I couldn't care less where she ended up. She was no longer my problem. Looking back, I see that everything that happened, no matter how painful, was necessary. I had to go through that betrayal, lose everything, to find out who I really was. Rachel's betrayal, Aaron's greed. They forced me to confront the truth about myself. For too long, I had let others dictate my life. But no more. Now, I'm in control. The business is thriving. My relationship with Sophie is something I never thought I'd have. And most importantly, I found peace with myself. I've learned that sometimes you have to go through the darkest moments to find the light on the other side. And as for the past, it's just that, the past. Rachel and Aaron tried to destroy me, but in the end, they only made me stronger.